Human spaceflight moves cultures. It moves governments. It moves and inspires generations of students to invest in themselves and in their country and in the development of their own domestic capabilities.
Welcome to The Global Lens, Science Diplomacy in Focus. A podcast exploring how science, technology, and strategic partnerships are shaping our world and the diplomacy that brings them together. Now, here is your host, Daniella Sussman.
This episode of The Global Lens, Science Diplomacy in Focus is brought to you by Global Signals, a bi-weekly newsletter for globally minded leaders. Each issue delivers early insights into science, innovation, and diplomacy, covering AI, quantum, biotech, space, and health. You'll find emerging signals, international partnership opportunities, and clear takeaways to stay ahead of what's next across the innovation ecosystem and global diplomacy. Subscribe today through the link in the episode description.
The story of space is no longer just about exploration. It is about collaboration that brings science and diplomacy together to shape our collective future. As the International Space Station, ISS, nears its retirement, Axiom Space is leading a new era of global collaboration, bringing together nations, scientists, and industries to shape the future of space exploration. This isn't just about engineering or rockets. It's about commercial diplomacy, where Axiom Space serves as a connector, enabling countries to build space programs, advance research, and shape a thriving global space economy. I'm thrilled to welcome Jared Stout, Chief Global Policy Officer at Axiom Space. With experience shaping U.S. space policy at the White House, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the U.S. House of Representatives, where he served as Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director, Jared now leads Axiom Space's efforts to bridge industries and governments worldwide. Jared, welcome to The Global Lens.
Thank you so much, Daniella. It's a pleasure to be here.
Axiom Space is building the first commercial space station set to connect with the International Space Station, ISS, by the end of 2027 and operate independently as a free-flying station by 2028. This marks a historic shift from a government-led space ecosystem to a commercially driven one. Can you walk us through what this shift means and how Axiom Space is enabling new players, countries, industries, and academia to join this vibrant stage in low Earth orbit?
It's a great question, and it's such an interesting topic. So I've been in the space industry now in some form for about 15 years. And the most interesting shift that has occurred in policy that I got to watch it in real time was this change from the government has to do everything in space. You know, there really is no commercial industry. There's no market. I mean, I remember in 2011 having conversations with folks who were saying, there's no, like, space is too hard. There's no way that a company could ever do the types of things that federal agencies are able to do. And then we started seeing all of this massive change in both the marketplace and in the policy ecosystem, where we had all of these really dynamic shifts going on. The federal government started supporting new and innovative companies that had never done things like this before. We were utilizing the commercial space industry in order to achieve national objectives. And that's something that's important to keep in mind in all of this, right? Like, the US federal government and really governments globally don't do things just because they think they're cool. They're trying to reach an objective, right? There's some sort of objective. Now, for some countries, that's going to be they want to build up indigenous capability. Some of that is they want to develop some sort of capability that their government can take advantage of. In the United States, we had this really interesting mix where some of it was purely driven by opportunity. Some of it was driven by budgets. You know, we just don't have as much money as we used to or that we thought we would have. And so maybe we can do these public-private partnerships. But at Axiom Space, we saw an opportunity with the retirement of the International Space Station coming up in 2030. This is an incredible diplomatic tool, global leadership, one of the hardest human constructed machines ever constructed. And it's been this incredible place for all of these governments to work together to a common goal. And with the retirement of the ISS coming up in 2030, Axiom Space stood up and said, hey, there's a lot of value here. We don't want to lose all of this value that has been built across the international partners. We have all of these other countries that want to go to space, but they're not a part of the International Space Station program. And so they just don't have the same opportunity. And so we're going to build a successor spacecraft that is capable of providing a lot of these opportunities, not just to the existing international partners, but also broaden it to others. And so when we look at what has been accomplished in such a short period of time, all of the new astronauts from countries that had never been to space before with humans that have flown to space in the last 4 years have done so under Axiom Space. Already, that opportunity that has been provided to business to support national objectives is already paying off. We're already doing it. It's not a question of if we're going to do it or when we're going to do it. We're already doing it. So now what we're asking countries is, okay, you have we've got these opportunities for you to fly to the International Space Station, but who wants to be a part of the next big revolution? Who wants to be a part of the next big change in the way that we think about space and the low Earth orbit economy? And that's the conversation that we've been having with countries all over the world who are really energized for the next stage in this evolution. So I hope that answers the question.
Beyond industry and policy, I want to ask you about Axiom Space's Global University Alliance. It was launched a few months ago, I believe actually in September 2025, to connect universities worldwide for microgravity research, from drug development to resilient agriculture. How does this initiative empower academia to drive innovation and help emerging countries build their research capacity?
I love this question because actually, let me take a step back. So at Axiom Space, we're looking for partners that want to change the world with us, right? That's what we're looking for. There's a lot of companies out there that want to provide, tourism, or they want to provide cool opportunities in space or something like that. We're looking to change the world. That's what we want. And so when we think about things like universities as engines of innovation and economic development and opportunity, we want to partner with those leaders at those universities to find the things that are going to change the world through science and research and technology development. So for me personally, I joined Axiom Space because I believe that microgravity and the utilization of the microgravity environment for science exploration is going to change the way that human health operates on this planet. I really believe that we are going to discover things in the microgravity environment that we would otherwise never have been able to either produce or investigate or develop, that the microgravity environment allows us to do. I like to use the example of investments in research and innovation that has been associated with the internet, right? Like all of the research and all of the innovation that has come from the advent of the internet age completely changed, it reordered the entire economic system. I believe that we are on the precipice of that same type of revolution in microgravity science. We have already been taking a lot of scientists and technologists and technology development payloads that would never have had an opportunity to access the microgravity environment. We're already taking them up on our private astronaut missions. We're already planning for them to have space on Axiom Station. We're already having those conversations today with companies and scientists and universities that are interested in utilizing the microgravity environment. And what we know is that increasing access increases opportunity. And there are students all over this world that are going to universities today that have the opportunity to completely revolutionize what we think we know about all sorts of different scientific investigation verticals. I, like Jared, is personally very interested in cancer research and disease research. I have a family member that I care about very deeply who unfortunately got glioblastoma multiforme, which is a very aggressive and very rare form of brain cancer. Typically, people that get GBMs die very quickly, and they don't really have much of an opportunity to treat that cancer before it gets to the point where it's terminal. There are scientific investigations going on in the International Space Station today that are making advancements in how we treat GBMs. When we look at things like macular degeneration, this is another area where 20 million people a year are affected by age-related macular degeneration. And we have investigations going on the International Space Station today that have to do with therapies and treatments for ARMD. These are the types of things that revolutionize people's lives. They completely change people's lives. And I just think about the science in the space community, we're always trying to make the argument that space is worth the investment. How do you make space worth the investment? You target things that have a direct impact on people's lives every day. And I truly believe there are students in universities today who we may see living on Mars or living on the moon, or maybe they do their PhD dissertation in space. I really believe that is the future that we're all building towards. And the faster we can get there, the better, because it is going to change the way humans live and work.
Jared, you have had extensive experience shaping NASA's commercial crew program and the Artemis Accords. As you're now at Axiom Space, your company is collaborating with NASA and the European Space Agency on the transition to commercial platforms and even developing spacesuits for NASA's Artemis 3 program, first for a private company owning and developing a spacesuit. How are these partnerships setting new standards for collaboration in space?
I think the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that everything that's going on in the commercial space industry, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like none of this would be possible if NASA and the European Space Agency and national space agencies across the world like JAXA and the Canadian Space Agency, if they had not had the foresight to make the investments to do these really hard things and to build all of these policy and legal and regulatory structures that we have in place today to support this type of activity. So we really have to start with the acknowledgement that all of that trailblazing, we are the beneficiaries of that. I think as we're talking about what the future looks like, we have this tremendous opportunity to think about government to government interactions in terms of economic development and trade. And I'm going to get a little bit wonky here because I am at heart a policy nerd. So I think that the future of government to government collaborations in space is going to be based in industrial diplomacy. It's based in the notion that industry in the United States is working with industry in other countries, where those governments get to support their industry, the United States gets to support its industry, and we do that cross collaboration where it's more of a business to business interaction. Axiom Space, at the end of the day, we're a business. We need to make money. We need to generate value for our shareholders and for our customers. Same thing is true for industry in other countries, right? We all operate off the same principles, but the governments have different motivations. And in the United States, what policymakers are looking for is to develop industry in the United States that is capable of providing value globally. And the way that the United States and other countries can create that value is by having our industries work with each other to provide a solution that both governments can take advantage of. And so for Axiom Space, the way that that looks is we have this industrial cooperation going on with Thales Alenia in Italy, where they're building the pressure vessel for the first module of our space station. They've been this amazing partner. They've done all of this great work. The Italian government has been supporting all of this cross-Atlantic collaboration. The United States government recognizes all of the great work that's going into that partnership. And building those types of direct industrial diplomatic relationships across borders is the type of work that is really hard, but really valuable. And it helps to ensure that the economic value that we're bringing back home to our countries has two sides to it. And that is really critical for the stability of long-term economic growth. So when I think about the role that Axiom plays, we sit right at the intersection of that industrial diplomacy. If you are a minister in a government in Europe or Africa or Asia, and you are looking to bring and develop value for your country in space, the way to do that is to work with a company like Axiom Space that sits at that intersection, where we have both the political and policy and legal structures in place, but we also have all of that technical know-how, and we can bring that to bear in a long-term sustainable relationship that's more than just, in the Apollo age, we would have called it flags and footprints. In the Leo age, we'll end up calling it something different, but we're not looking to develop opportunities for stunts. We're looking to develop opportunities for long-term relationships that bring value to our government, to our business, to our shareholders, and the same for our partners.
It's really interesting how you focus on collaboration, and space has also, been framed as a competition. You touched on research, you talked about the missions, and I want to talk about your AX4 mission earlier this year. It brought astronauts from India, Poland, and Hungary to the ISS. And I think for many of them was their first government-sponsored missions in decades. How does AX4 mission or these types of missions show that space can be a platform for global cooperation and shared wins?
Oh, wow. You and I could do an entire show just on this topic. I think the most interesting part of AX4 for me was this notion of the return to space. So Hungary, India, and Poland the last time that they had a human fly to space was, at least 40 years ago, and it was with the Soviet Union. Now, I don't want to totally date myself, but I sort of remember the Cold War. But for most of my formative experience growing up and watching the world around me evolve, the Soviet Union was mostly gone by the time I sort of understood what that even meant. So when I think about, wow, the last time all three of these countries went to space with a human was with a country that doesn't really exist anymore, like a system of governance that doesn't really exist anymore. And it was in an age of diplomacy that looks totally different than what our modern world looks like. Talk about a change that your culture, your country can feel. One of the things that I try to explain to folks when I'm talking about why human spaceflight. Obviously at Axiom Space, we're very dedicated to human spaceflight. It's the core of who we are. But why should a country that maybe has never invested in this before, why should they care about it? And the answer is that human spaceflight moves cultures. It moves governments. It moves and inspires generations of students to invest in themselves and in their country and in the development of their own domestic capabilities. When astronauts come home in these countries, they are rock stars. Like Tibor, he cannot go anywhere. Sławomir, he cannot go anywhere in their countries without we get these stories from some of these astronauts about they're just walking on the street and they can't get from the cafe to their house because they get stopped on the street so many times. That moves cultures. It inspires people to think about their place in the universe, their place in the world. Where do they fit into the geopolitical context of the future? And there is no doubt that Hungary, Poland, India, Sweden, all these countries that we've taken to the International Space Station, there is no doubt that their entire generation of students and entrepreneurs that were thinking, oh, space is too far away, it's too hard. That's stuff that big countries do. That's not something we can do. But the truth is that space is for everybody. It doesn't matter how small or big your country is, there is opportunity in developing space activity. And I think these countries, they see this firsthand and they're reacting to it and they're engaging on it. And I think that's only good for humanity.
I want to go back to what you highlighted earlier. You talked about Axiom Space and its expertise and international collaboration already. And we are seeing more and more private companies like Axiom Space take on roles that once were held by governments. So people might ask, who sets the rule for this new era of commercial space partnerships? For example, when it comes to frameworks like Artemis Accords or the Outer Space Treaty, adapting to these fast-paced shift. And what role is Axiom Space already playing in that evolution?
There's really kind of two sides to that. There's the international frameworks, right? So in space, we typically think of things like the Outer Space Treaty as being sort of the international rules of the road. These are the things that we've all agreed to, and this is how we're going to operate. And then there's the domestic, each country trying to figure out, what does this look like for us in our system of governance? And what are the things that we need to think about as a country? And that's going on all over the world right now, and the United States included. So there's, I think, more active legislation in Congress right now having to do with space than at any other point in our history. There's a lot of legislation that's been filed, and, people are discussing and debating what does that look like. In the EU Commission has put forward a legislative proposal, the EU Space Act, that is meant to harmonize regulatory and legal structures across EU countries. And they have this goal, they have specific goals that they're trying to achieve as an European form of regulatory system for space activity. We have other countries that are looking at, they've never had a launch industry. So maybe we want to have a launch industry. And so what does that launch industry look like? And how do we build a legal framework that will work for us? So the way that we're helping to contribute to that is we sort of operate a little bit like a think tank. We have a team of policy professionals at Axiom Space that are responsible for helping to provide guidance and provide input on legislative proposals and regulatory proposals. We just submitted some comments to the EU on the EU Space Act. And then we're also talking to a lot of the member states, both of EU and ESA, to have conversations about what does this governance look like moving forward? And then what are the impacts on our ability to deliver capability to your country? If another country is developing a particular legislative product or a regulatory system, and we are their connection to space, Axiom is their connection to space, then we want to make sure that they understand, hey, if you make this decision on this regulatory structure, you need to know how that's going to affect our ability to provide that capability to you. Now, some countries, maybe that's what they want. Maybe they're looking to protect their domestic industry, and that's a perfectly reasonable position for any country to take. The United States is sort of famously doing that right now through tariffs. But there's a lot of different reasons why you might want to have a regulatory system that is more permissive and supportive of international cooperation, especially if your country is an emerging space power. There are a lot of countries in the world that have big ambitions for what they want space to look like in their country. If you are new to that industry and you don't have that domestic capability, then we can be an answer to that for you. We sort of operate as this sort of privatized space agency that can provide all of these different capabilities to you. And we can usually do it a lot quicker and a lot cheaper than what it would take for you to grow your own domestic capability. And then we can bring your industry alongside us where it's legally permissible to do that, to make sure that we're helping you to build the domestic capability that you want to build. So that's sort of like in a nutshell, some of the ways that we're going about doing that.
You touched on the legislative process. Obviously, policymakers and places like Ghana, Portugal, or even in Washington, D.C., what lessons can Axiom Space's approach to commercial space diplomacy teach them about partnering with private companies? Is there anything else that you can also share about building their space programs, for example?
So obviously we talk to a lot of, on any given day, I'll have a call with the UK, and then I have a call with Egypt, and then I have a call with Hungary, and then I have a call with India, and then I have a call, like I sort of follow the sun wherever the time zones are. But the point is that we have a lot of countries that are coming to us that they're looking for advice. They're looking for, how do we go about building these sorts of things? And the first thing that we tell them is, well, the first thing you ought to do is just get your feet wet. We can help you do that. We can help you figure out, what does astronaut selection look like? What does building a human spaceflight program look like? There's all of these things that people, if you're new to human spaceflight, you would never think of, right? Like, what does an astronaut selection process look like for a country that doesn't have a NASA? How do they go about doing something like that? Also, what about the food? Like, what food are you going to take with you to space? And what does that look like? Do you want that to be a domestic product? Do you want it to be, there's like all of these aspects of human spaceflight and developing infrastructure that is very unique in space. And Axiom Space has all that expertise. We have all of that in a one-stop shop where if you're a government that's interested in building a capability, you can come to us, and we've got a myriad ways that we can help you figure out what the right answer is for you. For some countries, it's going to be a specialization in science, right? There's going to be some countries that go, maybe we don't want to have a human spaceflight program, but we'd really like to develop an industrial base here that's capable of doing biological and physical sciences. I'm going to just throw out something. And so we can help them figure out, what does that look like for them, and what are the investments through our university alliance that they can make that will help build up a workforce that's capable of creating payloads that can go to space and then bring that value back home to them. For other countries, it might be our orbital data centers. We have a product line of orbital data centers. This has been very hot in the news right now. There's, some big players in the AI space are all recognizing that terrestrial-based data centers is not going to totally get the job done for the amount of data processing that's necessary for AI globally. And so they're looking to us and saying, okay, we think we need these orbital data centers. What does that look like? And there's some countries that are going, well, we've got a lot of infrastructure here for data processing, and we need to increase our ability to do that. And so they're partnering with us and trying to figure out how can we all work together on those orbital data centers. So it looks a little bit different for everybody. I am really blessed that I lead this fantastic team that, we've got people all over the world, and our team is responsible for starting those conversations and having those conversations with these countries and saying, what do you think this looks like for you? And how can we brainstorm together about ways to partner? And it's been really successful. We've had all of these wonderful partnerships that have really been flourishing as countries really start to get their arms around what their domestic needs are for space and where they can leverage their space capabilities to build those industrial diplomatic connections.
It's such an exciting time. We definitely need to continue our conversation as you build new partnerships. I want to wrap with a few quick questions.
Okay.
So you talked about the first step for countries without a space agency, how they can join this new era of space collaboration partnership with you guys. I want to talk about the most common mistakes governments make when working with their private space companies. From your experience, you don't need to name governments specifically, but some of the observations you have had.
So I think one of the biggest mistakes that anybody makes, and this isn't specific to governments, but it's a unique government challenge because of the way that governments function. And we have this problem in the United States as well. When you are talking to a commercial space company, if you're a government, you have to remember that I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. I am in the sense that I care about space and I want the space industry to be successful. But at the end of the day, I'm a business. I need to make money. So I have to make sure that the partnership that we develop is both beneficial to you and your national objectives in your country, as well as beneficial to me in generating revenue and profit for my shareholders. That disconnect for a lot of governments is sort of hard to wrap your mind around. Now, it's not because governments don't understand how business works. This is not about that. It's about that translation between how government policy directly impacts business capability. And there's this old famous saying in the United States that anytime you want more of something, you reduce taxes and regulations on it. Anytime you want less of something, you just increase all the taxes and the regulation on it, right? So when we are talking to other countries, sometimes we have to have that conversation. Like, look, it's really hard for us to do business in your country right now because you've made it through government policy. You've just made it really hard to close our business case. We would love to sell you this product. We would love for you to take advantage of this capability. But the way that your law works right now is just not going to work for us. Or the way your policy works right now is just not going to work for us. So that conversation, it's a tough one to have with people, but it's an important one because we need everybody to understand that at the end of the day, we got to derive value on both sides of the equation.
So if you could recommend one experiment to foreign ministries that they could try in 2026 to boost space partnerships, what would that be?
I think the University Alliance is a really cool and growing opportunity, especially for emerging space powers. If you are a country that is new to the space industry and you're trying to figure out, like, what does this really look like for me? The University Alliance is a really fantastic opportunity. It's a great entry point to build connectivity between the universities that are your engines of innovation, your domestic industry that maybe this is the first time they're building a payload, and then your scientists, technologists, entrepreneurs that can all sort of get in on it. There's a lot of different ways that we can package that up and make it work for you as a country. But the University Alliance is probably the direct point of entry. It's the first place that would be a really good opportunity to explore. And then if we discover like, hey, the University Alliance is great, we definitely want, this university to be a part of the University Alliance, but also let's talk about getting some payloads to space and let's see if we can generate some interest in our country. We've had several countries that have come to us and said, I don't think my government is going to be behind any big expenditure on a human spaceflight mission. But, I've got $5 million US that I can spend on something. What could I spend that on? And I think the answer is we work with universities, we work with your domestic industry, and we figure out a way to get your payload to space. I think that's probably the easiest point of entry.
Great recommendation. Obviously, you deal with a lot of governments, diplomats, science diplomats. From your perspective, what is one space industry habit they should adopt?
You should start from a position of yes and let circumstances dial you back to no. When I was in the government, one of the biggest frustrations that I had was that the default position of most government officials, and I would count the U.S. as a big offender of this too, right? Like this isn't specific to any particular country, but the default position is no. And then I have to figure out a way to convince you that this is the right thing to do. That has a chilling effect on the ability to try new things, to develop a healthy risk tolerance. And what we really need to be doing is starting with the position of, yes, we want to do this. We think it's important and we want to go after it. Great. Now, what are the circumstances that may need to dial us back as we go? But we need to start from a position of yes.
So for diplomats, innovators, researchers listening, in addition to the Global University Alliance, what other, maybe one more practical step they can take to ensure space remains a place of collaboration and not just competition? What would you tell them?
That keeping humans alive in space, doing experimentation in microgravity, is some of the hardest stuff that humans have ever done. It is unfathomably difficult for some of these things. I mean, if we think for just a moment that there are people alive on this planet who have never experienced a world where every human was living on the planet. For the last 25 years, at least one member of our species has been living in space. And there are people alive today for whom that has always been the case. That is really, really hard to do. And we achieved that. And we achieved it through international collaboration. The International Space Station is a partnership of industry, government, scientists, and in some cases, adversarial countries, all sitting down together in a room and figuring out how to make it work. That is the best that humanity has to offer. And there is no getting around that. Like, this kind of stuff does not happen unless we are willing to say yes to each other, to find answers, to be patient, to be kind, and to give each other opportunities to demonstrate where we can work together. And so when I talk to other countries, when I talk to other companies that we want to work with, I always start from a position of we cannot do this all by ourselves. The only way we are all going to build the future that we want is by building it together. So let's all sit down in a room and have really hard conversations, and let's figure out how we can do that together.
I just want to ask you before we close, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience today?
The only thing that I would add is that the world, the geopolitical world that we live in today, I don't think it's a surprise. I don't think I'm breaking any news here by saying that it's a really tough world we live in today. Geopolitics is being upended in a way we haven't seen in a very, very long, in generations. The way that countries talk to each other and talk about each other is changing dramatically every day. And things that we had once considered to be pillars of stability in the geopolitical order are rapidly evolving. But the way that we create that new world together is by sitting down in rooms, having hard conversations, talking about how we can get past the things that are different to find the things that are the same, and accessing our common humanity to achieve really impossible things. We are looking for partners that want to change the world. I'm not looking for flags and footprints. I'm looking for people that want to change the world. And if you are that person, I want to hear from you. Let's figure out a way that we can work together. Let's figure out a way that we can bring change to my country and to your country and to our businesses. Let's figure out ways that we can look at really hard problems and say, nah, we can fix that. I am looking for those types of people. I'm looking for those types of countries. I'm looking for those types of governments and industries. So if you're one of those, come talk to us at Axiom Space, because we want to work with you.
What an inspiring way to end. Jared, thank you so much for joining the Global Lens, Science, Diplomacy in Focus, and for sharing with us how Axiom Space is redefining orbit as a platform for global collaboration and innovation. And for those who have joined us, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to the Global Lens on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, and join my bi-weekly Global Signals brief for insights on how science, innovation, and diplomacy shape our shared future. Thank you for joining.
You've been listening to The Global Lens, Science, Diplomacy in Focus. To hear more conversations at the intersection of science, policy, and international partnerships, subscribe to The Global Lens on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and over 30 platforms around the globe. Send us your ideas and guest suggestions to Daniella@globallenspodcast.com.